Some news of the day items for you. The hydroxychloroquine. What do you know? I said it correctly. Hydroxychloroquine. I know the media is dinging them up on this, and you talked a little bit about it earlier on Fox and Friends and some other places. But just so I understand, how comfortable is the president with doing this, and did specifically the doctor prescribe it for him? Just understanding.
Yes, the doctor did prescribe it for him, and he took it after having several discussions with Dr. Connolly about its efficacy, and he believed that Dr. Connolly that the benefits outweighed the risk for the president. And hydroxychloroquine, it's worth mentioning, is a drug that has been approved for at least 3 other conditions. Malaria is one of them as a prophylaxis. I had someone in my office say, "Oh, I've taken this drug several times ahead of me going to trips in places where there were malaria-heavy areas." Lupus is another example. So this is a drug that is out there that has been shown to be safe with these conditions, and it was issued a emergency use authorization to use this as essentially like a right to try. So if you're someone who has this, who's looking for a therapeutic, who has COVID and is looking for a therapeutic, hydroxychloroquine was something some doctors professed optimism about. We know it's approved for other uses, so you do have a right to try it, in essence,
right,
to reflect on the language of the president's previous legislation that gives people a right to try in the waning days of their life or when they're facing a fatal illness.
Do you think the media is blowing this out of proportion? You got Neil Cavuto and Joe Scarborough and some others. And China, quite frankly, just called it, witchcraft. That the president's doing witchcraft from the Oval Office with this.
It's so unfortunate when you turn on the headlines and turn on the TV in the morning, as I did this morning, watching a certain network, and to hear just complete misinformation about hydroxychloroquine, suggesting that it could be fatal for someone should they take it, and when in fact there are millions of Americans who take it for arthritis, for example. Right. Yes, it should always be something that's prescribed in the context of a doctor-patient. No one should be taking this drug if not prescribed by a doctor. It's very important to say that. Only your doctor can say that this is for you and prescribe it to you, but nevertheless, to completely act as if this is some sort of poison when there are many, many Americans and many people around the world taking this for lupus and other illnesses, it just does more harm than good, that kind of fear-mongering, that kind of misinformation. So it's frustrating to turn it on and to see that, because it ultimately is very damaging.
The criticism would be that the FDA and the government, if you will, the federal government, only recommends that it be taken in a hospital setting. So what's the reaction to that, the pushback about that criticism? So
I talked to Dr. Hahn about that this morning from the FDA, and Dr. Hahn said, first, this is a drug that has a long safety profile. It should always be prescribed from a doctor to a patient, but has been shown to be safe. And I explicitly asked him, what about outside of hospitals? And he said, yes, it's okay if a doctor prescribes it to you in your ordinary point of care. That is an acceptable way to go about this. I think what is being mistaken is the fact that there was a safety notification put out based on a study that was not a clinical study.
Right.
It was not a VA study either, but it was based on fatalities in the VA, and basically it didn't take into account comorbidities, but it did ask questions about hydroxychloroquine, and they did put out a safety notice, as the FDA regularly does, about studies, but nevertheless it's still out there. It's still something the FDA stands behind as saying, if you are in the situation where you're prescribed it by your doctor, it is something that you can use and have access to. So, there's a lot of nuances, but those nuances are all too often left out of the coverage.